Hi, I'm Jean Schumacher. I'm founder of Simply Plant Based, where I have programs to help you to change your health destiny. And check my website, simplyplantbased.net. And I have with me tonight the privilege of being with Dr. Neal Barnard, who is the founder of the Barnard Medical Center and president of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. Thank you, Dr. Barnard, for taking the time again to be with me.
Well, it's a pleasure, Jean. Thank you.
And I know you've been on your book tour,
Mm-hmm.
and you have this new book, and we're on part 4. But before we dive into that, actually we're on part 5. And before we dive into that, I've got a couple questions from our listeners. And so
Okay.
one of the questions was, is flax estrogenic, and will it cause issues with my reproductive system?
Flax. A lot of people are using flax seeds because they can grind it up and get omega-3s out of it and a little bit of vitamin E and so forth. But the question does come up, is it estrogenic in some way? What they're talking about is something called lignans, which are sometimes referred to as phytoestrogens. Phyto means plant, P-H-Y-T-O, phytoestrogens. Plant-derived estrogens, which raised the concern that if they can interact with an estrogen receptor, could they promote cancer, for example, or affect reproduction in other ways? But what we've learned is that things are more complicated than that. There are some things that interact with an estrogen receptor in such a way to drive bad things, like to drive cancer cell production. But there are others that interact with the estrogen receptors in such a way as to be a brake on that. And the lignans seem to be more in the brake category. They do not appear to promote the growth of cancer cells. If anything, they seem to retard the growth of cancer cells. They may promote a process called apoptosis, which is it's built-in cell death. So the idea is if you have cells that are going rogue, and if they just die off quietly rather than threatening the organism, that's apoptosis, and the lignans seem to support that process of clearing away the clutter in that way. So the short answer is no, they don't seem to be a problem and may well be a benefit.
Excellent. Another viewer had a question, what is Hashimoto's disease and how do you treat it?
Hashimoto's disease is a common form of hypothyroidism. And it was actually named after a Dr. Hashimoto in Japan, who I think it was 1912, discovered this, what has come to be known as an autoimmune form of hypothyroidism. In other words, your body is making antibodies that attack the thyroid, and that ends up keeping it from functioning very well, and you don't have enough thyroid hormone. That's Hashimoto's thyroiditis, or Hashimoto's hypothyroidism, you can call it.
So how would we treat this?
It's treated in a number of ways. Well, one of the ways that doctors treat it is they pull out their prescription pad and their pen. And so they write you a prescription for thyroid hormone. But also, because what I think really has to be thought of is that the autoimmune attack is the basis for it. So the question is, what is attacking the thyroid? Your body makes antibodies that are little protein torpedoes that are there to attack viruses and bacteria, but they can attack you too. They can attack the thyroid gland. And when they do, they make it not work right. It turns out that diet changes might help slow down that process, or maybe even eliminate it completely. So first of all, I should say we need more research in this regard, but we've seen a number of individual case studies where people went on a completely whole foods plant-based diet. I mean, throw out the animal products, and the autoimmune attacks stop. Now, that's not entirely or they're slowed down. That's not really a surprise, because we see this with other autoimmune conditions. We see it with asthma, rheumatoid arthritis, Sjogren's disease, and hypothyroidism is also in that category.
Okay. Well, another viewer wrote in and asked and said, there's 4 types of diabetes. My son has what is called brittle diabetes. So I thought there was only 3. Is there 4?
Well, brittle diabetes really is a way of describing type 1 diabetes. It's not really a completely separate form. There are kids who have type 1, and type 1 means that the insulin-producing cells of the pancreas are gone. They've been wiped out by an autoimmune attack. And so you need to inject insulin to provide what the body is no longer able to provide. That's fine. But there are some kids where it's brittle, meaning their blood sugar is really variable. It goes up, it goes down, and it's just harder to control. So that's brittle diabetes. It just means it's harder to control. And let me say one thing. We, as you know, pioneered the use of vegan diets, low-fat, plant-based diets for type 2 diabetes, but we've been applying them to type 1 as well. The people with type 1 will still need to inject insulin, but when they are on a healthy plant-based diet, they seem to need less insulin, and their blood sugar seems easier to control. So this will not stop you from needing insulin, but it will help you to minimize the amount.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Well,
it's a good thing.
Yeah. In your new book, Your Body in Balance, you just launched this and you're out and about on your book tour.
Yes.
How can people find out where you're going to be?
Oh, well, thank you for asking. I'm on my Your Body in Balance book tour. If you go to our website, pcrm.org, you'll see Your Body in Balance there. Click on that and it'll bring you to the tour schedule. And hopefully people will be able to come out.
Well, I really can't say enough about this book because it pinged on so many levels. I mean, first of all, I'm a case study in your book. I mean,
you are indeed.
And I think you picked the perfect chapter for me. I have to say that because I'm all about environmental toxins. So perfect, spot on there, Doc. So
thank you for letting me tell your story.
Oh, well, thanks for putting the pieces together and helping me backtrack and figure it out because it was quite illuminating. So Today we're discussing the thyroid, which is the foundation of this, new book. So let's start with the basics. What is your thyroid and what does it do?
The thyroid is at the base of your neck, right here above my thigh, and it's shaped like a butterfly, sort of. And I think of it as being your energy generator. It makes thyroid hormone that goes out to all the cells of your body, and it gives them energy, it maintains your body temperature, and so forth. And for anybody who's a Star Trek fan, I'm going to say your thyroid is Scotty. Do you remember him, the Scotsman who's in the engine room? And whenever the Enterprise needed more energy, Captain Kirk would say, Scotty, give me more energy. And of course, Scotty would get nervous. There's only so much he can do.
Captain, she cannot take it anymore.
That's it. That's your thyroid. Your thyroid has to provide energy. And it's a big job. I mean, think of this little gland providing thyroid hormone and instructions to energize your entire body. And things can go wrong with it. You can have too little thyroid hormone so that Scotty is just not coming up with what the captain needs. There are other times where it gets dysregulated, meaning that the hot thyroid hormone is being produced in too great a quantity. That's hyperthyroidism. That's dangerous too.
Wow. Well, you shared Wendy's story, and I thought that was spot on. Would you share that with us? Actually, we got to meet her at the presentation. Your initial launch of the tour, she was there. So.
Yes, she was, and she shared the story that I described in the book. Wendy is a film producer. She lives in New York, and she was really, really busy, as film producers are wont to be, not sleeping very much, but it was not just the demands of her job that were pushing her. It was as if something physical was going on. She was not sleeping. Her moods were kind of roller coastering all over the place. She had terrible PMS, and she started gaining weight for no clear reason. She went to see the doctor. The doctor did a number of blood tests, and the doctor discovered that she was hyperthyroid. It's you can think of it as being caffeinated, except in a way that's really quite disagreeable. And most people, when they're hyperthyroid, they will lose weight, but once in a while they can gain weight. It's your weight regulation is just not good. But anyway, so Wendy had this, and the doctor's treatment was effectively to wipe out the thyroid. You can do that. You can destroy the thyroid gland. And if you do, then you need to take supplemental thyroid hormone for the rest of your life. She said, wait, stop. Let me think about this. And
that's kind of scary.
Well, it is. And she made the good decision because, as fate would have it, there was a nutrition lecture that she went to for her mother's benefit. Her mother had high cholesterol. In the course of all this, the topic of autoimmune conditions came up, and she started, looking into how the thyroid might be affected by foods. She began to learn more and more about this and decided, this is it, let me try this. She cleaned out her kitchen. She threw out all the animal products, all the ice cream, all the chicken, gone. And she went vegan. She also eliminated gluten, which some people find a beneficial change as well. And she started feeling better, a lot better. And she went back to the doctor after a while and got her blood tests checked again. She wanted to see if she was making progress. So she was waiting at home for the call to see what her blood tests were now, and the call never came. The phone number never rang. And so day after day, she was waiting, where's my lab test? So she called the doctor's office and said, what's the deal? And the person answering the phone said, well, we only call you if there's a problem. And she said, but I have a problem. I'm hyperthyroid. And the person on the other end of the line said, no, you don't. You don't have hyperthyroidism. Your blood tests are entirely normal. And so she checked again, and it was true that she was back to what we call euthyroid. However, a little bit later on, her mother passed away. And she was under a lot of personal stress, as you can imagine. And she kind of fell off her diet, and her thyroid started acting up again. And so she thought, okay, got it, back to my healthy diet. And this really confirmed for her that, at least for her, her diet was driving this hyperthyroidism. She's not alone. Hyperthyroidism, as I mentioned, is an autoimmune condition for most patients. And by taking away what might be inciting that's foods, you can do better.
Wow. Well,
Yep.
How can you know if your thyroid is working correctly? I mean, walk us through the different blood tests that you could get.
Okay. The kind of basic blood test is something called TSH, or thyroid-stimulating hormone. And what this is, if your thyroid is not getting out of bed and doing its thing, if Scotty is having trouble waking up, thyroid-stimulating
The
hormone.
dilithium crystals.
Maybe that's
right?
it. That could be it. TSH pushes the thyroid to work harder. And so if a doctor finds that your TSH level is rising, that's a sign that your thyroid is being sluggish. Your body's making more and more TSH to push it. It's not doing its job. On the other hand, if your thyroid is really going crazy and you're hyperthyroid, it's cranking out a lot of thyroid hormone, in that case, your TSH level will fall very low because your thyroid is doing everything it needs to. It doesn't need to be pushed at all. Now, your doctor can also measure thyroid hormone itself. It'll measure something called T4. The 4 comes from the fact there are 4, this will not be on the test. There are 4 iodine atoms on it. And there's another one called T3, which has 3 iodine atoms on it. That's the active form. And then your doctor can also look for the antibodies and quantify them and see how much of an attack you're under. So those are the basic things that doctors will do. They can also do various scanning technologies to have a look at your thyroid. And sometimes they just take their hands and feel for a thickening called a goiter.
Oh.
Yep.
Wow. Okay. Let's talk about the foods that affect the thyroid. Let's start with iodine. How does the thyroid make use of this?
Okay, well, the thyroid needs iodine in order to make thyroid hormone. The hormone is not a terribly complex molecule, but it has to have iodine in order to be prepared. 4 atoms for T4 and 3 for T3. And I have to say that in 1924, the Morton Company put out iodized salt in these little blue cylinders with a girl in the umbrella. And I have to say it has iodine in it, and that pretty much wiped out low iodine in the United States, at least among people who used it. However, being modern people, we might use Himalayan salt or kosher salt or sea salt. And some of them are iodized, but most are not.
No.
If it's not written on the label, then it's not. And so you can actually run low in iodine on that basis. So.
Okay. So what are some good sources for food that we can get in that to get some iodine back?
Okay, all right. Iodized salt does work. It's fine, and you don't need very much, about maybe 1/3 of a teaspoon, something like that. But to tell you the truth, my favorite source is you go to the nearest sushi bar, and you have some miso soup with little wakame seaweed in it. Or you order a cucumber roll. Don't order the fish sushi unless you're very well insured, but have a cucumber roll, a sweet potato roll, an asparagus roll, something like that. The nori seaweed that it's wrapped in, like all seaweeds, are high in iodine. And that's really the best natural source. And it can be wakame, it can be nori, it can be arame, which, by the way, I have a recipe for this in my book where you make a cucumber salad with arame and a little vinegar, dressing. It's just so light and so delicious. But the seaweeds, frankly, are the best source of iodine, if you ask me. You can take supplements, but I would encourage you not to do that unless you work with a doctor to make sure you actually need them.
Well, I like kombu. I take little strips of kombu and I will put it in, like when I make my beans and I put them in the Instant Pot, I put, about an inch of water above my beans. And then when I'm done cooking them in the Instant Pot, I'll take a ladle out and I'll put that into the blender and I'll put a strip of kombu in there because I cannot have salt. I'm extraordinarily salt sensitive. So this works for me. So that's my and I don't like a fishy taste, with like seafood. I'm not a big fan of it. So this to me doesn't have that big of a fishy taste. So that's my go-to.
Perfectly fine. Kombu is really, really high in iodine. So what you said is, yeah, exactly. What you said, a little bit goes a long way.
Right. So what is the most common cause of hypo or hyperthyroidism?
If you're somewhere other than the United States, it's low iodine. But in the United States, for the reason I mentioned, that's not the big issue. The common reason for it is antibodies, as in Wendy's case. She had hyperthyroidism, but it's the same issue for hypo, that something in the body is triggering the production of antibodies that attack the thyroid. And doctors can measure this in the blood. So then the question is, what's triggering it? Well, antibodies are triggered by a foreign body, a virus. But in this case, the biggest foreign bodies that we're exposed to, if I can put it that way, are foodstuffs. A chunk of a steak or a pork chop or an omelet. You're getting a huge load of foreign proteins in your body, and there's some evidence that hypothyroidism and hyperthyroidism can be triggered by these eating foods that cause the production of antibodies.
Okay. Well, how about soy? What effect does soy have on thyroid function?
I think the jury is still out on soy, I have to say. In the Adventist health studies, people have looked at soy. In men, doesn't seem to affect them one way or the other. In women, there was a suggestion of a higher TSH level, meaning that high consumption of soy might be associated with more hypothyroidism. The other piece of this is that soy, well, like many foods actually, if you're taking thyroid replacement and you swallow it with soy milk, you're going to slow down the absorption. So that it's not true of just of soy, it's true of many foods. So take your thyroid replacement on an empty stomach rather than with food.
Okay.
Yep.
So what is a good menu overall for a healthy thyroid?
We got a clue from the Adventist studies that I mentioned earlier, where researchers looked at which diet groups did the best. And when it came to hyperthyroidism, the people who did the worst were meat eaters, people who would eat anything, omnivores. They had substantially higher risk of hyperthyroidism compared to other diet groups. And the people who did the best by far were those who followed a vegan diet, no animal products. When it came to hypothyroidism, though, it was a little bit different. The people who did the worst were actually dairy-consuming vegetarians, ovo-lacto vegetarians. And what we think is going on is that they're not eating meat, they're making up for it with that yellow asphalt that's all over their pizza that we call cheese. And cheese has dairy proteins in it that have been, frankly, suspects in a lot of autoimmune conditions. But again, the people who follow a vegan diet do the best. So what we think is important is you do need to have iodine, whether it's iodized salt, sea vegetables, your kombu will work fine. That's number one. Number two, avoid the triggers for an autoimmune condition. And so that's avoid the animal products. Have a clean diet based on vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and beans. And that's good. As always, you want to take your vitamin B12, which you need. It doesn't affect the thyroid, but you need it because the diet doesn't otherwise have it. But that's going to baby your thyroid gland.
All right. Well, let's change tracks a little bit and talk about
Okay.
healthy skin and hair. I mean, you know it when you see it. It's almost like your skin is glowing, and also unhealthy skin, like when you see it. Because, like, oh my God, as a teacher, like I would see it in the kids' faces, like especially with acne. Oh my God. And I felt so bad.
Oh, yeah.
Because when you see their faces that are just, they're covered, yeah, I just feel for them. I do, because it's such a hard time, teenage years and all the angst, and, your face is just literally covered with this. What is acne?
Acne is when the hair follicles start to change under hormonal stimulation, and you have more oil production, and also the cells that line the follicle start to overgrow, and they can cause a plug, and then bacteria behind it will grow and create a little bit of pus in there, and that's a whitehead. And of course, kids will pick at it and so forth, and they'll end up with scarring. But it starts out with hormonal changes. But the curious thing is it does seem to be aided and abetted by food, which has been a big controversial thing for a long time, but the evidence now does suggest that foods do in fact play a role.
Well, I have seen, there's a great video by Nina and Randa. Oh my God, they're identical twins, and they have such a powerful story. So you can find their video. I've seen it on Dr. McDougall's site, but would you share their story?
Yeah, Nina and Randa Nelson. They're the kids of Jeff and Sabrina Nelson. And they were raised as vegans on a pretty healthy diet, obviously. And they have been super productive kids, musicians and actors and things. But they developed acne, really bad acne, that for them was really tough because they wanted to perform, and they felt they didn't look good and so forth. And just being vegan alone didn't seem to stop it. And they started trying to sort out what else might be the problem. And they decided that even though they were avoiding animal fat, they were getting, frankly, just too much fat in their diet, too much grease in their diet. And they found this on Dr. McDougall's website, that he said, cut out the oil and see how you do. Well, they did it, and they became really quite scrupulous. Instead of dribbling oil all over their foods, they really were cut it out completely, and it was miraculous for them. Their skin just cleared up right away. And this is an issue for many people, where when they go on a healthy diet, their diet is really, really good. No animal products at all, totally plant-based, which you or I would, and many other people would say is best. But you need to go another step or two. And when it comes to hormonal conditions, for whatever reason, whether it's cramps or breast cancer or many others, getting all that grease out of the diet does seem to play an important role. And it certainly does seem to have been for Nina and Randa.
Wow. And if anybody gets a chance, do watch this. They post some really unbelievable pictures from before and after. And it wasn't that far apart, the pictures themselves. It's just so powerful. Really.
Yeah, amazing. It sure is.
Chocolate. I don't think life would be worth living if there were no chocolate involved. I mean, how bad is it? What impact does it have on acne? Come on.
Okay, well, chocolate has been controversial forever. And the idea was, teenagers would say, when I ate chocolate, I broke out. Is it true? And I have to say, if you search this online, you will see a big resounding no, it couldn't possibly be true. And then if you follow that logic thread a little bit, they all go to one particular study that was done in the 1960s by a Dr. Albert Kligman in Pennsylvania. And his experiment was that he took chocolate and he fed it to some or this is the way it's told. He gave some chocolate to some young people. It didn't have any effect on their skin, so chocolate is innocuous. Look into the experiment a little bit more, and you see a couple of things that are kind of creepy. The first thing is that there were some young people in the study, but most of the people in the study were actually prisoners. He was famous for this. He would go, there's a prison outside of Philadelphia, where he would go and use prisoners in all kinds of things. He subjected them to psychotropic medications, infectious viruses, toxic chemicals. And this was back before we had modern protections. So his chocolate experiment was probably the most benign thing that he ever did. But he became an extremely controversial figure for the way he used and abused research participants. Anyway, but the other controversial thing was he did, in fact, give people chocolate. But his comparison product was just this big glob of partially hydrogenated fat. And the results were, he said, well, you can't really see much difference in the acne between the two, so chocolate couldn't possibly matter. But it obviously raises the question, what do you mean? What's that glob of partially hydrogenated fat? That could be bad for you too. So anyway, so other researchers have done much more careful experiments where they'll check that they'll use chocolate of various kinds, chocolate with or without dairy, chocolate with or without added sugar. And I have to say, chocolate does seem to trigger acne. The curious thing is it may not be dose related. It's sort of like poison ivy. You just have a little poison ivy and you've got a rash. Or if you're sensitive to some allergen, you just have a little bit. It seems to act like that. So it may be that a very small dose in sensitive kids or adults will trigger their acne. So I'm sorry to break your heart, but if you had acne, I would suggest avoiding the chocolate.
Well, thank goodness I'm past that phase.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, sure.
Well, we've talked a lot about dairy products. I mean, we did your book, The Cheese Trap, which I have to tell you, sealed the deal for me. That was it, especially when you talked about the cheese in Italy, I don't know if I'm saying it right, the casu marzu.
Right. The one with maggots.
Yeah, that there.
Yum. Yes, exactly.
Anyway, that book, it really was so powerful for me. I mean, it really helped me finally kick the cheese trap, because now I look at it in a totally different way.
Yeah. It's a little creepy.
So what effect does dairy have on acne?
The best evidence that we have suggests that dairy does contribute to acne. I think we need more research, but what we have is fairly compelling. It started out with a lot of people suspecting that dairy was an issue. But in 2005, Harvard researchers queried women about their use of dairy products in childhood and how bad their acne was. And it basically those who consumed a lot of milk had more acne, as they recalled it. However, the question was, is that really true? I mean, maybe their recollection is not so good. So the researchers started over and they said, let's watch some kids as they're actually going through their formative years. And it was a big study. It was nearly 5,000 kids, as I recall. And the same thing seemed to be true, that those consuming the most milk had more acne. It wasn't huge, but there was a definite increase. And you'll see it not just with fatty milk, but you'll see it with non-fat milk too. So there's something about the milk that is contributing to this problem. What that is, there's a lot of possibilities here. One is that there are hormones in milk. We've talked about estrogens, but there are others as well. In addition to that, the proteins in milk seem to trigger a lot of sensitivities in kids, and the acne may be one of those. So bottom line, there is no reason for children to be drinking milk from a cow, and if they avoid it, in some cases, they may hope that their acne can improve.
Well, does the milk also boost the IGF-1 levels?
Yes, it does. IGF-1 is insulin-like growth factor number 1, and this actually goes way back. Researchers at Creighton University, Bob Heaney, working for the dairy industry, showed that if you feed people glasses of milk, their IGF-1 level will rise. And that got our attention because IGF-1 is linked to prostate cancer. It's also linked to breast cancer. It makes things grow like cancer cells. Yeah. And
you're starting with a baby cow, at 60 pounds that goes to 600 pounds in 6 months?
Exactly. And it's not just that there's IGF-1 in milk, there is, but more important than that is that the milk triggers your body to make more IGF-1. You swallow the milk, and it's probably the sugar and the protein in it that triggers your body to manufacture more IGF-1, and that's more important. And so the IGF-1 presumably goes to the hair follicles, contributes to oil formation, and feeds into it. I have to say, that's the least of your problems with milk consumption, because it's linked with particularly prostate cancer, ovarian cancer, and some other forms of the disease are still matters of investigation, but well worth being concerned.
Wow. Well, isn't acne also like a sign of PCOS?
It can be, yes. PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, is a largely genetic condition, but it's where women have a trace of male hormone a little bit more than what they would normally have. Everyone has both. Female hormones and male hormones. Men have both and women have both. But in the case of PCOS, women have just a little extra androgens, female sex hormones, and that seems to trigger the acne. So the answer, of course, is you want to get your hormones back into balance to the extent that you can. Because all kinds
like getting
of
your
issues,
body in balance?
Yes, exactly. I mean, all kinds of other issues come with PCOS. Acne, thinning hair, and other things as well.
Okay. Well, speaking of thinning hair, one of the issues that many of my clients share with me as we age is hair loss. So can foods help you keep a healthy head of hair?
They can. In fact, this has been a curious thing. In Japan, we've talked about Japan before. When Japan westernized its diet, it became a natural experiment in many ways. Back when the diet was rice-based, there was relatively little breast cancer. Menopausal symptoms were more mild, it seemed. Less obesity, less cardiovascular disease, less everything. And then as the diet westernized, many problems came in. And one of the observations that you'll see, if you look at the Japanese health literature, is dermatologists start reporting more baldness in men. Now, I think we have to take this with a grain of iodized salt. However, it does look to me like the westernization of the diet contributes to our hormones going crazy. And if there's a little extra testosterone activity in the blood, that could then lead to more hair loss. So that's probably what we think is going on. And by the way, testosterone is critical for, well, critical. Testosterone is to blame for baldness in men. Back in the 1940s, a researcher became quite well known for having tracked men who happened to have been castrated for medical reasons, for whatever. And
I can't imagine voluntarily doing that, but okay.
It's another story. But what this particular researcher observed was that stopped hair loss. If they had been castrated, they would not go bald. If they were going bald and they were castrated, the hair loss would stop. If they were castrated and the hair loss stopped, and then you give them testosterone back, the hair loss continues. So all these things show that testosterone causes hair loss. But it doesn't, by the way, it doesn't just cause hair loss. It causes hair loss up here, not so much on the sides, and on the chest it causes hair to become kind of bushy. It's a mischievous hormone, but there you have it.
Well, I got to share one story with you. This is one of my clients, and she started with me last summer, and she is losing weight, of course, and she's, I think, up to 37 pounds now. And
fantastic.
Yeah, she is. I mean, she completely switched, whole food plant-based, SOS, and she went bald when she got pregnant with her son. Now, this is almost like 50 years ago that she's been battling this. And she tried, they put her on drugs and this and that. Nothing helped. And she just resigned herself. And a little bit of hair would grow out, and then it would fall out. And then a little bit would come out, and then it would fall out. And so she just kind of resigned herself to, this is the way I am. And there were certain parts of her head that it was not growing in at all.
Right.
Well, going plant-based, two things happened to her, because she was in general good health to begin with, but her hair started growing back.
Huh.
So that's number one. And number two, she was going to have surgery on her feet. She had such bad bunions. She wanted to lose weight first so that her feet would, straighten out. I mean, she wanted to have the surgery, but she wanted to lose the weight first before she had the surgery, before she put some more stress back on it. Her feet healed up. Her feet straightened back out. I've got before and after pictures. It's like, I've never seen feet straighten up like this.
Wow.
And she said, one of the things she told me was she could feel almost like a tingling in it, almost like when your foot falls asleep kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
And she said she would feel it, and then she knew it happened the first time, and that kind of freaked her out. But she knew when it was happening the second time on her left foot, she knew that was starting to heal. So it was almost like there was this healing process going on within her foot that I've never seen this happen. It was just absolutely incredible.
Huh.
Her hair back.
The restoration of hair, I think we're still at a frontier where we don't know everything about this. However, there is one piece of this puzzle. And we discovered this years ago when we were doing a study for women who had menstrual pain. And we put them on a vegan diet. And one of the things we noticed in the blood is there's something called SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin. SHBG, this might be on the test actually. SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin, is a big protein that reins in sex hormones. The sex hormones like estrogens and testosterone adhere to SHBG. And as long as they're adhering to it, they don't do anything. They're inactive. So let's say a woman has traces of testosterone that are going to the hair follicle. In the hair follicle, they convert to another hormone called DHT, and that promotes baldness. Let's say now she's on a plant-based diet, and her SHBG level increases, reins in the testosterone, and leaves her hair follicles alone.
Wow.
That's a theory. That's a theory.
Okay.
But that would explain what she's experiencing.
Wow. Okay.
Yep.
Awesome. I will take that back to her and share it with her. It with her.
Who knows? See what happens.
So
and she has you to thank for her progress, may I say?
Right? I mean,
yes.
I just, this is just all I want to do for the rest of my life is just help people, because it's such an amazing feeling, you know? Yep. So how do foods fit into keeping a healthy head of hair? Okay.
Well, as I mentioned, let's say you eat a healthy plant-based diet that will increase SHBG, does it pretty reliably. And what that does, SHBG is, think of it as an aircraft carrier. You know, estrogens and testosterone are like fighter planes. They're buzzing around in your bloodstream. If you have a good aircraft carrier, they can settle down and stop doing mischief. SHBG is your aircraft carrier. It reins them in, and a low-fat plant-based diet will boost SHBG. It also seems to help reduce insulin resistance, and this is true in lots of people who have diabetes, obviously, but also women with PCOS, men who are losing their hair. They often have insulin resistance. Insulin resistance aggravates androgenic problems like hair loss. So those are all part of it.
Well, in 2009, you talked about a study where researchers compared 80 young men with progressive hair loss to men without hair loss. So what did they find?
Yeah, it was that the men who had hair loss, the men who were balding, were more likely to have insulin resistance, and the insulin resistance was related to the hair loss. And that can be true both for men and for women. Yeah. So to tackle insulin resistance, you want to get the fats out of your diet. No animal products, keep oils very low, because insulin resistance is encouraged by the buildup, as we've talked about before, the buildup of fat inside the muscle cells, the liver cells. If you get that fat out, then they're more insulin sensitive.
Well, what are some other causes of hair loss?
Lots of things. We mentioned thyroid disease already. When Wendy was hyperthyroid, and also people who are hypothyroid, they look in the mirror and they say, "This is not me," and their hair doesn't feel right. It can be brittle. It can fall out. So if your thyroid is out of balance, that's a problem. Medications can sometimes affect hair. And I once in a while will hear of people where their diet is just so deficient that they don't have good hair growth. You don't hear it very often, but you will. And one of the things I almost hesitate to raise this, but about 4 times in the past 30 years, I've heard of people where they were on plant-based diet with so much fruit and not really very high in protein. They were neglecting their beans and their protein-rich vegetables. And what they discovered is that their hair seemed to be more robust if they would bring higher protein plant foods back into their diet. They would see less hair around the shower drain. And so it doesn't mean meat products. What it means is tofu or tempeh or just beans. Putting the protein back in seemed to help their head of hair. So that's something you can give it a try. I think that's quite rare, but you will see it.
Well, okay, I got to throw this one in, because you start to see men losing hair, and about the same time, it's sprouting out their ears. Why? What could possibly that help in nature, please?
It's because the hair is going into their scalp and coming out their ears, and now they just take a comb and they could comb it over.
I need a weed whacker for my husband. I mean, literally. What's going on with this?
This is nature's mischief. It puts hairs where you don't want them, and it takes them away where you do want them. And nature just has such a bad sense of humor. We just have to put up with that sometimes.
Okay. So what can we do to keep our skin and hair healthy?
You want to avoid animal products, obviously. Animal products cause hormones to get out of balance and contribute to acne, oily skin, lots of problems. So when I say avoid animal products, that means replace them with vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans. Okay, step 2, keep oil really low. A lot of people are using lots and lots of oil. And even if it's a quote-unquote healthy oil like olive oil, still you want to keep it to a bare minimum or keep it to the amount that's actually in the olive. Nothing says you have to have excessive amounts. And there are other high-fat foods too that people get carried away with, peanut butter and stuff. I would avoid added sugars as well, which I think you'll find helpful. Some people will notice that if they're into sodas, that their hair will get kind of flat or the curl in it will change. I have no idea why this is. I can't explain it biologically at all, but you will see it. And then when people get away from the sugary junk, their hair looks more lustrous. Do have plenty of protein, but have it from plant sources. That means the legume group and all the legume products, whether it's beans or lentils or peas or soy products as well. And by the way, while we're talking about skin, don't forget that sun is every bit as bad as you ever thought it was. I mean, we all want to be out in the sun, but use a protector because there's nothing that will age your skin more than ultraviolet rays. So
well, even if you're just going out for to get your 20 minutes to get your vitamin D,
you have to be careful with it. It's a double-edged sword. Nature did design us to get some sun exposure that gives us the vitamin D that we need. The sunlight on the skin will cause it, but at the same time, you do want to be cautious about it, and it's really easy to get more than you need, and that will translate into wrinkles and splotches later on in life.
Okay. So bottom line, whole food, plant-based, SOS.
Yep, you got it. And while you have a wonderful head of hair and beautiful, healthy looking skin, as you do, Jean, then you get all these other great benefits as well. It's not only good for you outside, but pretty darn good inside too.
Well, and I healed my thyroid too. We'll be talking about that
Exactly.
soon. So for those of you who missed the first parts of this series that we're doing, you can find those. We did the women's health, part 1 and part 2, men's health, part 1, well, we just men's health, and then diabetes. You can find those on my website, simplyplantbased.net, as well as on my YouTube channel, Jean Schumacher, Simply Plant Based. And I can't say enough about this book. I really recommend everybody, it should be in everybody's home. I mean, this touches on so much information that you need to have access to, because it's not something that you're just going to put down, you're going to pick it up and go back again and again, because there's just so much information in it. So in our next video, we're going to discuss foods that fight moodiness, stress, and one of my personal favorites, being a chemistry teacher, avoiding environmental chemicals. So thank you so much, Dr. Barnard. Once again, you're amazing.
Well, thank you, Jean. Thanks for doing all that you do to spread the good word. You're educating, you're inspiring, and you're changing people's lives. So thanks for including me.
One day at a time, right?
Thanks. You bet.